Hi everyone, so in yesterday's video I was drawing a distinction between meaning and meaningness, and I was emphasizing that understanding this distinction, which is essentially the distinction between signification and significance, is key to understanding type, in fact, how type relate to reality through the structuring of their experience by way of fantasy. And that every type has a fundamental fantasy, not just the INFJ. The fundamental fantasy is primarily determined by the dominant function. So the fundamental fantasy of the INFJ and that of the INTJ is roughly the same. It's expressed differently, as we will see in this video. But the appreciation of the distinction between meaning as signification, as sense, and meaningness as significance is crucial. If you were to ask a person who says to you, well, that experience was very meaningful to me, if you were to ask you for what she meant, expecting her to give you some sense, you might think that she's not making any sense. She might not be able to give you the signification of what she means. She can only give you the significance. So for her, in that case, she experienced meaningness, not meaning. And she's not able to express the meaning or the signification, either because she can't articulate it or she doesn't see at all in what way giving the bare meaning touches the meaningness of what she wants to talk about. Okay? And in the last video, I said, among other things, that, for example, if you take the fantasy life of a TI dominant and compare it to the fantasy life of an NI dominant, meaning number one, meaning as sense, meaning as sensefulness, meaning as signification, is very important. Meaning as significance, meaningness, meaningfulness is much more prominent in the fantasy life of the NI dominance. And the INTJ, for the INTJ, this is less obvious. It's true that it's less obvious. The fact it's less obvious does not make it less real. It's just that the way that the INTJ expresses this in their life is not really as intersubjective. It's not as directly social, you know. Often when we see something as obvious in someone else, it's because socially they're just showing this thing to us. And so we're able to just capture it, see it, and then say, yeah, like that's what it is. And in the case of an INFJ, given that they have FE as their auxiliary function, they take other subjectivities to be essentially primitive of the way they experience the world. Yeah, you're going to notice that if you have the right training for how you look, you're going to notice that. With INTJs, it takes a bit more, it takes a bit more training. It takes a bit more observation. The reason being that they don't express this directly necessarily to other people. The TE function, this is something that I've emphasized in many videos before. The TE function is, in fact, this is something that I have not emphasized enough in previous videos. I've started talking about it in my NI notes, so this will become more of a theme as we go forward. But nevertheless, TE is also a social function, okay? And it's great that on the fourfold, on my Discord server, people already seem to have an intuitive understanding of this fact, okay? And by the way, if you want to be a part of our community, access my library of deep dive videos exclusive for patrons, long format videos where you can see me discuss NI and mysticism and magic and NI and memory and lots of deep dives into INFJs, other types, NI, the unconscious. Join our Patreon, my Patreon. In doing that, for a few bucks a month or a year, you help me massively. You help this channel going because I could not do this without you. And I need you to keep going. So there's a link to my Patreon down there. Join the community. It's not expensive. You get great perks. In any case, so in my community, and we're kind of on the same page here. T is a social function, but it's not a social function in the way that FE is a social function. FE is in a sense more primitively social, in the sense that it takes other people as the primitive authorities on the ways of the world. And so if it has to explain things if it has to justify things, if FE has to make a point, if FE has to justify its reasoning or even just itself, its emotions, it takes other people to be the authorities. What we call an intersubjective function, an interpersonal function. TE is a little bit different. TE takes the world as its interlocutor. That's why we sometimes are tempted to say that TE is more impersonal than FE is impersonal, okay? And that thinking in general is more impersonal than feeling is. It's not entirely accurate, but it goes somewhere toward kind of encapsulating this notion that the way that TE interacts with the world to do, to achieve, to justify, to set in motion is with the various primary aspects of the world, right? Things, objects, processes, so forth. We're familiar with that. Things, objects, processes. For TE, that is kind of the common vocabulary. But what I had underestimated in the past is that there's also another ineradicable part of the world, and that's the social nature. That's especially to say persons. So whereas for the INFJ, persons are the ultimate authorities, for the INTJ, persons are just authorities among others. And in fact, often they come at the end of the chain of justification. It's like the INTJ pursues a project, and then when he's kind of, or she is confident that this project says something, in fact, brings meaningness, okay? Expresses the same fantasy of repair, but through a kind of engineering of a certain state of affairs in the world without having to rely on other people as voices and spokespeople of reality. Not the authorities in that way. But T still needs to get that final justification from other people, but rather than trying to persuade more in the way that FE does, T expects people to be persuaded by saying, look, I engineered this. This is evidence, right? So there's less of persuasion to be done, because in a way the persuasion is done by means of what has been achieved by previous engagement with things, objects, and processes in the world itself. But people are still a part of the chain of justification. That's the sense in which TE is still a social function among other things, whereas FE is a quintessentially social function. And that's why meaningness, in the way that the person who's able to knows how to look, can see the search for meaningness in INFJs, is not directly going to see it in INTJs, because often they will look at the INTJ's products, what they have done, right? Typical thing will be something like, an INTJ, again, this is kind of a fictional example, but there's a lot of real life examples that compare to this. It's like they, say a genius INTJ designs like an entirely new way of regulating climate change, or devises in a particular kind of AI to regulate climate change, or super high-speed transport system, or it's kind of, I'm talking about Elon Musk here, sort of is able to comes up with systems to live in other planets or something. Often people will tend to look at the product, but actually what's important is, what is the fantasy life that led to the justification of this particular enterprise? For the INTJ, it's never enough to say, I just wanted to create this thing. There's always a strong vision that this is going to bring more meaning in some way, it might be their own conception of what meaningness is, but it's still, in a sense, a repairing of something that was missing through the engineering of something that then requires other people to acknowledge what has been done. If that doesn't exist in the fantasy life of the INTJ, there's no motivation for doing it, okay? Don't let yourself be misguided by these few examples of INTJs that we think we know, that seem to be more like evil, or at least to pursue their own self-interest and not care about meaningness in their projects. Because it's only a handful. Sometimes they are very media, they are omnipresent in the media or in the collective consciousness. We think that they embody all INTJs. No, in fact, what you're seeing is a personality disorder that is explaining the antisocial behavior of the person or the narcissistic behavior of the person. You're not seeing the INTJ side here, you're seeing the personality disorder side. For the vast majority of INTJs, the focus is meaningless, but by means of a project that has often a concrete sort of engineering type dimension. And I don't mean engineering in a purely literal sense. I mean engineering, you make something happen in the world. Okay? So by the way, guys, if you want to understand NI dominance, and especially INFJs in more depth, don't forget my two books, the Ecstatic Soul and the Infinite Soul. Ecstatic Soul is all you need to know about the INFJ consciousness, the INFJ mind. The Infinite Soul is the INFJ in the world, how to find meaning, purpose, and value as an INFJ. If you want a deep understanding, you should read these books for sure, and the links are down below. See you tomorrow, guys. Bye-bye.